A Fall in Time, Week 1, 13th to the 20th of September, 2010. Hello, and welcome to the first letter and this year podcast in this limited series, A Fall in Time. If you have no idea what this is about or why you are receiving it, head to this introductory piece or read more below. A Fall in Time is a limited, re-envisioned series from me, Alexander M. Crow. Apart from sharing this adventure, the first time I spent months alone in the woods, I also shared dispatches on the intersection of fiction, nature, and place writing, and empowerment through ancestral skills. I would love you to subscribe. The idea is, as this autumn fall progresses, I shall continue to share daily updates on Substack Notes, posting text and photos and even very bad video. You can view each day as a diary entry, telling you what I was doing out in the woods, one fall in time, 15 years ago. I am drawing on my journal entries, blog posts, photographs, and also a now obsolete and private Tumblr blog I kept back in 2012. Using these alongside my memory and current thoughts to bring you this adventure with the added value of more than a decade of hindsight. This year, 2025, I am also using the series of daily Substack notes I shared in 2024. Some simply reshared, others reworked, and others entirely rewritten. I'm adding in extras here and there too, especially in the form of letters on the subject, along with bonus images. I have a lot more subscribers and followers than I did last year, and Substack Notes and Substack in general is a much bigger place after the past 12 months of growth. It makes a sort of sense to share this again, and helps me with finalizing my book proposal featuring this topic. Each week, I shall send out a letter, this one, with collated words and photos from the week's notes, and an extra paragraph or two. Although this particular adventure, physically and temporally, ended in December 2010, it continued to shape me, my beliefs, my journeys, and myself in all the years since. And this is a crucial point to be made here at the outset of the adventure. Sometimes we need to look deeply into the past to learn who we are and where we may perhaps go, if only we listen to the answers and act on them. Without further ado, here is the first week, covering the period of the 13th of September 2010 to the 20th of September. I have copied the text and added image galleries. If you do use Substack Notes, you can also head to my Notes tab and see them there, restacking and replying should you wish. For those of you reading this, I suspect this email and the others to follow will certainly be too long for some email clients, so you may need to open it fully to read the whole and to see all the photos. When I was young, long before the internet, long before audio streaming or podcasts, audiobooks for children were either on vinyl record or, it being the 1980s, cassette tape. They often came with a book attached, especially the Ladybird books I remember my sisters having, and when it came time to change a page, there would be a chime to tell you to do so. For these Fall in Time podcasts, I am copying this idea and modifying it slightly. I shall play a sound in between the different entries, between the different days. That sound shall be one I recorded out in the woods on this particular adventure, the cry of the female tawny owl. If you are listening, it sounds like this. Farewells. Tomorrow, the 14th of September, I shall begin sharing my limited series discussing a time I left behind my life and walked out into the woods to stay out there from September to December alone. Along with being reunited with my journals last year, I also discovered or remembered past Alex had exported all his text messages from that period as a text document, which feels a little strange to read, almost like eavesdropping on a much younger me somehow. Some are from friends I am no longer in touch with, and that makes me a little melancholic and or nostalgic. When you set out on a path different to that society expects, it is all too easy to no longer be understood by many, and, if I am to be honest, and I use this space to be brutally honest at times, I am terrible at keeping in touch with people, a direct result of my neurospicy brain. 15 years ago today, I was busy doing my best to clean the rental property I had been living in, saying goodbye to friends, neighbours, and a woman who had awoken something vibrant but confused within me. That, and generally panicking that I have made entirely a wrong decision. There is a specific fear that comes with knowing you are going out to wilder places for a long period of time, a fear which is increased 100-fold if you are going alone. Strangely, I like this sensation. It keeps me sharp, but it can put a lot of people off. This photo was taken on my old pre-smartphone, but one I later used to take pictures of my handwritten blog posts to send them to my sister Lydia to copy out and publish online. It was one of the last shots I took in the English city of Sheffield, Yorkshire, where I had lived for nearly a decade. I think this is fitting in a certain way. The night was falling on my time there, but there was light enough to show me the path. Do subscribe or follow along if you wish to keep up with the adventure ahead and behind. I'm looking forward to sharing this with you. And this photo was taken at the Lescar pub in Sheffield. Each a glimpse and gone forever. 15 years ago today, I was sitting on the second of a series of trains, heading west to Glasgow, after catching my first train north from Sheffield at 05:29. No one was there to wave me goodbye, which felt fitting. I had slept for about an hour. Each minute was taking me further from the life I had built over the preceding decade, a life which had included a degree in archaeology and prehistory, a marriage, a divorce, friends, lovers, and struggles with trying to find meaning in a place in a world I did not feel was quite right for me. I had chosen the 14th of September deliberately. Even further back in my days, it was the date I left behind my job at a bank, working with mortgages, would you believe, to head off to university, the second, more successful time. It made a sense to me to be able to use a date which mattered, bookending a period of my life neatly, in the way writers are wont to do, creating our own legends. Long rail journeys are always perfect for introspection. Beyond the window, the world passes by, this field, that coppice, then a series of villages, all gone in a blink of an eye. One of my favourite poems from when I was a child was Robert Louis Stevenson's From a Railway Carriage, and it still works enviably, even in this day and age. The title above comes from this poem and neatly encapsulates the way my mind was running through scenario after scenario, memory after memory, what was, what is, and what will be. At the time, I did not really have a plan. I had not even decided where to exit the train. I just knew I needed solitude and the nature. I needed to rebuild. I did not know I would stay out there until December. I have no photographs from this day. The accompanying photos were taken some weeks earlier during a visit to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. It makes sense to include these looking out over Waverley. Nor did I write in my journal that day. I did write about the journey a few days later, however, especially about a brief conversation I had, which has stuck with me years later. On the very last train of the day, around about tea time, I had settled on where I would leave the carriage and head out into the glistening landscape beyond the window. I had requested to stop. It was not normally in use unless either asked for or if the driver saw someone waving frantically from the platform. There seemed to be a romance and mystery to that, a good place to start. There were others in the carriage, others for whom I made up stories, trying to work out their lives, their motives, why they were travelling this way, and what the landscape beyond the glass inspired within them. At a table near me sat a young man and woman and an old man. I worked out that the woman was the man's granddaughter, the younger man her partner. They were doing that thing of the young, ignoring the elderly or giving them scant replies and little attention at best. I remember being frustrated for the man. He would try and engage him in conversation, shouting loudly over the noise. He had large hearing aids behind each ear and clearly struggled to make himself heard in more ways than one. He looked out the window almost as much as I did. Then, around about the same time I began to pack my things away for disembarking, he rose and cautiously made his way to the end of the carriage where the doors are. There he stood, gazing at the rough and tough country we were passing. I suspected he had been here a long time ago. His gaze was certainly deep, looking at landscape and, it seemed, through time. I walked to the door, my ridiculously large and heavy pack dragged along the floor, wooden staff in hand, weighty shoulder bag already pulling me down. The man asked me what I was doing, and I gave him a brief synopsis of my rough plan of why I was out there. He nodded to me, glanced outside, then back again, replying with words which have stayed with me ever since. What you are doing is banking for the future. The Bones of the Mountains. My first camp was one of necessity. I walked along a track for a time and turned off into the woods, following a deer trail down to the coast. Everything was soaked after days of rain, something in which the west coast of Scotland excels. The previous evening, quite late, I had staggered to a halt, dropped my pack and strung tarp and hammock between two oak trees, thick trunks and stretching branches, reaching out inland, away from the prevailing ocean wind. This entire hillside was rock and oak, with bog, heather, bracken, and the occasional other tree thrown in. All was wet, all was full of scent and sound, whether the owls at night, or the eagle, the buzzard, or the raven during the day. There were other birds here, smaller friends, and, whether it was night or day, the call of a loon over the sea log I camped beside. This landscape grows from the bones of the mountains, worn by ice and rain, shattered by frost and fall. The trees that spring from cracks between boulders merge with the rocks themselves, like the oak I share here. Covered in lichen and moss, they are almost indistinguishable from one another, overlapping and entwining. I was to spend many hours studying the minutiae of their covering, each tree or rock a tiny ecosystem. There are traces of ancient woodland management all over these hills, and it is my guess this oak was pollarded many years ago, cut back to provide timber. That first night I slept deeply and long, before cooking breakfast and scouting for a better campsite, one out of the wind and weather, one more hidden, and one where I could take a few days to recover and, crucially, to think. The long journey north on the 14th had tired me, along with the lack of sleep and the sudden, rather serious exercise, carrying a pack that weighed 2/3 of my then body weight across rocks, through marsh, and under trees. I was shattered physically, but also emotionally. I needed rest, I needed time to come up with a plan, and I needed a new camp. I found a good place near a fast-bubbling burn, Scottish for stream, with a wide beach nearby, a tidal flat, which would be perfect for setting up my folding creels and gathering shellfish and seaweed, and plenty of driftwood and dead seasoned oak for fuel, hidden amongst trees and shadowed boulders. I was tempted to move the same day, but decided another night wouldn't make any difference, so stayed put, beginning to write in my journal, a new classic moleskin blank-paged. Beginning to write, I wondered whether I would fill it. By December, I was to fill it and nearly 3 other notebooks. My journal entry for the 15th has the following line: "So, I have gone and done it." And done it I had. Traces and Trails. I moved camp in the afternoon of the 16th, carefully. I took my time, knowing that the days no longer held a countdown as they had previously, times when I only had a week to 10 days out there in amongst the nature, then it was back to the office, to artificial light, the smell of worn carpets, and even more worn clients. This time, I really did have as much time as I needed, and it felt liberating. As I walked, I startled 2 red deer, both hinds, both on their own. The rut, or as we call it in Scotland, the roaring, had yet to begin. There were traces of other animals too, seal bones, badger sets and sign, a fox bark, and something dark that disappeared in the branches. Pine marten? I was very conscious of the lack of decent path, or path at all in places. To slip is one thing, To slip with a 155-litre unwieldy beast filled with over 40 kilos or 88 pounds of supplies and equipment, entirely another. The deer track I followed meandered and climbed steep banks, crossed deep bogs, and wound through and beneath low-hanging tree boughs. It was a difficult journey, but I made it safely and set my hammock and tarp up with plenty of time remaining to cook and to watch an amazing sunset, the first of many. I only took 2 photos this day, both from my hammock before I moved camp. Neither was very good, taken on my not very smartphone rather than using my camera. Still, this serves as a fitting illustration and reminder of the location. Several of the bonus pieces I'm working on this year, I started some last year but never finished them, mostly for paid subscribers, discusses this point, that of equipment. Not just the tools and gear I carried, but the food. I'm not a fan of bland, boring cooking, so I carried more. All manner of things normal people would never think of taking into the woods, supplementing with wild food as much as possible. An illusion of wilderness. September the 17th has no journal entry. Fortunately, however, I remember what I was doing from my photographs, snapping 56 of them over 3 hours in the afternoon. Unfortunately, I can now only share 6 here in a Substack note. This was another day for exploring, for beachcombing. I first walked along the coast, taking pictures, examining possible shellfish collecting rocks, fishing spots, and places to set my 2 portable creels, all the while gathering neat piles of driftwood to collect later. Then I ventured into the still green oak woodland between the deep sea loch and heather-clad hills above. It was interesting how many fallen oaks lay suspended above the forest floor, caught on other trees and the ever-present shattered rocks. The resulting grey wood is seasoned solid and makes excellent slow and hot-burning fuel. I began to consider how it would do the ecosystem good if it were once more to be sensitively managed, perhaps someone using a heavy horse to drag trunks along ancient trails, taking time to thin and choose the right trees, plant new ones, encourage the understory, and, above all, keep the sheep and deer away. At some point in the preceding 2 years, those woods had been cleared of the menace of invasive rhododendron. The undergrowth had suffered in the years the native plants lacked sunlight, but it was already making a satisfying comeback. There were still far too many deer, however, with little future for the woodland unless they are removed, their numbers vastly reduced. The deer eat all the young trees and damage too many of the older ones too. My own preference would be to reintroduce the wolf and the lynx, but those are contentious issues. Sitting here typing this in the Alps of France, I know I'm not too far away from wolf and lynx. Both are now back and doing well, and both species are essential to the ecosystem. Sadly, though, the hunting estates of Scotland, often owned by absentee landlords, the majority of whom inherited or bought land stolen from the local people, are unlikely to want a reintroduction scheme. Much better to have the rich blast away at the deer, right? As it was, during my time out on the coast, I kept the deer wary. I often wonder what they made of me, smelling more of campfire and salt than the normal human scents they knew. When you cook on a campfire and boil oil water that way, you can very quickly mask your scent. I had an added advantage at the time, as I would smoke hand-rolled cigarettes and later a pipe, scents which many animals simply do not associate with humans, even if they know the smell. In Scotland, at the end of summer, this can also help keep the midges at bay. It is now well over a decade since I quit smoking, losing this scent-masking agent and midge repellent, but certainly aiding my health. The deer would often only leap away when I got close, failing to scent me, surprised, often pausing to look back and see what had startled them. When they did so, and if they saw me, they looked mildly embarrassed before disappearing into the trees with alacrity. Looking back, I wonder if that relatively short walk on that day wasn't the first time I began to consider staying in one area for a while, rather than continuing on around the coast. After that scout around my camp, I had a pretty good idea of the resources available to me, of the food options, the fuel situation, and where to gather water. It was an excellent area, away from some of the more heavily trod paths and trails, with a good distance to the nearest people and habitation. Nowhere in Scotland is far from a road, nowhere truly wild, but the illusion of wilderness was strong, and it tugged at something within me. Peril and injury. The 18th of September 2010 was another day of exploring, this time further along the coast in the opposite direction. It was not the best weather, but that never matters when you're exploring. I found some excellent spots above a rod and reel, and had now observed enough of the tide to know where it would be wise to try and catch some crabs. In the afternoon, showers meant that I spent some time under my tarp preparing firewood, where I somehow successfully cut my thumb down to the bone whilst using my knife. To add insult to literal injury, I cut over a healing scar from where I had dripped molten paracord plastic on my thumb a week previously, whilst preparing my gear for the adventure ahead. Even now, 15 years later, I realize I can still see those scars. Fortunately, I always carry a large and extensive first aid kit, and am often mildly ridiculed for doing so cleaning and patching myself up was not too hard. It was also fortunate that the angle of the cut facilitated quick and easy healing. I heal fast, which is a useful superpower when I am stupid enough to damage myself a long way from any help. I used to be incredibly squeamish about these things, passing out at the drop of a hat or blood, but I have had to patch myself and my friends up so many times since that I now work on autopilot without really thinking about it. Good job, really. My brain is a strange thing. Every adventure needs injury and peril, or it is not a proper adventure, and this event would not be the last peril. I haven't shared the images of the fun. I did before, but I don't think they actually serve any purpose here. As Substack notes, only now allows 6 images per note, whereas during the first year I shared this adventure here, I was pushing that figure considerably further. I will share the extra photos in the weekly summary. Do subscribe to see these extras and others. The hardest place on earth to light a fire? It was not until the 21st of September 2010 that I started keeping my journal with any depth and regularity. In a way, this is a shame, as I have lost out on the thoughts that were on my mind in the few days from the 15th. Instead, having to be content with the odd line, scribbled note, or observation, or photograph or text message. I was still taking time to recover from the days and weeks leading up to my rail journey, but also to rest and think about everything that had led me to that point, all the years of my life. Processing things was to become my new normal. As I processed firewood, I also processed emotions and events from my past. As I processed water, I would consider my future. The two, a physical action and a mental emotional one, went hand in hand. I do still have my photographs and my SMS text messages from those days. As a writer, I like to store these things away and come back to them, as I never know when they may come in useful. One day I might print them out too, or at least some of them. Receiving and sending text messages involved ascending to the top of the nearest hill, whereupon I'd wait, send out cube messages, and receive others in return. Then spend 15 minutes or so sorting out the resulting mess, replying where needed, clarifying elsewhere. I eventually learnt not to click send before checking to see what had arrived. Both photos and messages serve as reminders of what I was doing 15 years ago. The answer for this day was splitting driftwood and staying out of the incessant rain. I once attended a fantastic lecture given by Ray Mears, and at the end there was a question and answer section. One of the questions someone asked was this: what is the hardest place you have found to light a fire in the whole world? Not the most original question, admittedly, but his answer was interesting considering the man is well travelled. Without a pause for thought, he answered, the west coast of Scotland. On days like the 19th of September 2010, it is not hard to see why this would be his answer. It is not called temperate rainforest for nothing, you know. At one point on this wet, drake day, I suddenly heard many voices, as though a crowd of people were approaching from the west. Eventually, the sea was bedecked with kayakers, chatting away amiably. Not one of them saw me hanging in my hammock, reading and enjoying the sound of the rain on my tarp. Other than when I went to resupply, this was by far the largest group of people I saw until December, and the closest to me. On the photographs, note the plastic washing up bowl gathering rainwater from a drip line on my tarp. A common joke around that time was that I always carry everything, including the kitchen sink. Later, I began to carry an Estwing plastic gold panning pan instead, multifunctional and much tougher. The billy can over the honey stove, boiling water for purifying, a pint of tea, the sea lettuce soaking to eat later, firewood for the stove processed with knife and baton, and some items I had begun to gather to make other things, such as spoons from the large mussel shells or needles from bones. For that lecture, with Ray Mears, my friend Giles asked the final question of the night. To paraphrase, he asked, how large a part of what you do, spending time out in wilder, more natural places, whether alone or with others, anywhere in the world, how large a part of that do you see as a spiritual experience? Initially, Ray answered in the negative, but then, for the first time that whole evening, he began to stumble over his words. He paused, looked directly up into the audience to where we were sitting, and said, actually, that's everything, yes. It lies at the heart of what I do. It is all. And he walked off stage. I wish I'd recorded the exact exchange, but that is close enough. I think this is a crucial point, and one which I shall return to here. Over the decades I have been out in nature, I have realized I have moved beyond the question, how do I live in wild places as a part of nature, to one far more interesting. Why do I and we want to live in wild places as a part of nature? The why ties neatly with the how, but the former gives us possible answers about the identity of our species and potentially our future. Time the deer. On the 20th of September 2010, I began to write the first of a series of blog posts I was to share whilst out in the woods. As I mentioned in the introduction to this project, these blog posts would be handwritten, then photographed and sent via my phone to my sister Lydia. Sometimes this process took a long time, with each image taking minutes to send. Other times the wind seemed to be in the right direction, and they would zip speedily away into the ether, and a world I was beginning to feel was before as I was during, the after, as I write this, is now. Either way, I did not complain about having to climb. I always sat up high, looking over the sea loch below. One day, a sea eagle lazily swept close by, riding a thermal from the hillside, close enough to see their eye. Wings stretched like a proverbial barn door. Another time, an RAF fighter jet passed at the same height, too quick for me to take a photo, but not too quick that the pilot didn't see me and waved back with a quick flick of his hand. Small vignettes were beginning to fill my journal. Notes to jog the memory, to flesh out later when I wrote more, whether in a blog post or not. For example, on this day, there was the time I was laid in my hammock writing when I heard a cracking of branches just upslope. My camp was at the foot of a tumble of rocks below a small gorge, a well-trodden deer trail crossing the top at right angles. Looking up, I saw one deer, and another, and another. In total, 12 red deer walked the trail east, none of them noticing me, the smoke from my stove clearly masking my scent, the hammock, tarp, and my stillness disguising my visual presence. I decided to head them off, run, and try to see them again, cutting around the rocks and weaving through oaks and rowan. The deer hunt scene in Last of the Mohicans very much in my head. Unfortunately, the wind was not on my side, and I heard the lead deer bark a warning which in turn startled a golden eagle from where it had been perched on a stag-headed oak. It flew directly over my head, and I could feel the downdraft from its wings as it labored higher. The deer, by then, had melted into the woods. After nearly a week sleeping in my hammock, my days and ribbon were melded to nature time. No longer did I stay up late. To do so would mean a waste of battery life on my head torch. Instead, I began to frequent daylight and the half-light of dawn and dusk, sleeping when it was dark. I was moving slower, at a pace that nature set, and this is something I shall discuss further soon. In general, I find it takes around 5 days to achieve this pace, sometimes a little more if you are not alone, sometimes a little less. It is a state and pace which I believe we should all attempt to achieve. It does something to us, something ancient and very, very real. The handwritten page in the photos is from the blog I mentioned, the collage of images showing how I prepared and lit my fire in my portable honey stove. At this point, there was little need for a full campfire, but fuel preparation did take a lot of my time that way. The title for today's entry into A Fall in Time, Time for Deer, comes from a poem by Solly McKeown, or Solly McLean for the anglicized spelling and pronunciation, and apologies for my pronunciation, named Hallaig. It is a poem I love, capturing the soul of the Western Highlands of Scotland and echoing as it does both the nature and a sense of departure, a melancholy which, when you know where and how to look, is everywhere, following the enforced clearances of the 19th century. A poet translated his work into English, and it is this version which appears in the link to the Martin Bennett take on this from his album Bothy Culture. Bennett was an artist who was far ahead of his time and very much missed. Seeing as I can only place one link here in Substack Notes, I'll pop the Gaelic version and translation in Restacks, along with a different translation into English, this time by Seamus Heaney, in case you are interested. On to you. The first year I shared a version of this adventure, my weekly recap email letters contained embedded Substack notes, through which readers had to click to see the whole. This year I am copying and pasting the text, adding photographs and extras as images and galleries in the body of the letter, with no need to click away to read it. I already have all the text, whether identical to before, subtly altered, or entirely different and new, saved in a Scrivener project, so copying and pasting the whole does not take long at all. I also think this format might encourage and enable those of you who subscribe but do not use notes to read more of this adventure. Each weekly letter will be long, but that might not be a bad thing. And, of course, this year, each weekly letter comes with a voiceover, which in turn is shared widely as a podcast. If you have enjoyed this, please can you share it with anyone who you think might also enjoy it? This might mean forwarding the email to friends and family members, perhaps those who love nature or Scotland, adventure, history or bushcraft, or it might mean heading to Notes and Restacking or sharing on other social media channels. I would greatly appreciate this, thank you. It would be fun to have as many people reading this as possible as I post to different days and weeks. Finally, I welcome questions and comments and try very hard to respond to all of them. This can take time, but I do reply eventually. And what does this letter make you feel? Do you know the west coast of Scotland or long to visit? Have you ever spent a long period of time alone in nature? Or have you also made a huge switch in the direction of your life, embracing something different, something unexpected? Thanks for listening.